Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the IMC Agri and Food Processing Committee's inaugural session on Kharif crops and the impact on food inflation. My name is Ashay Doshi. I'm the chairman of the Agri and Food Processing Committee for this year. And I want to welcome not only our audience, but our esteemed host, Mr. Chandrasekhar, Dr. Goel, Mr. Madan Sabnavis, Ms. Rajini Lamba, and all our guests for this wonderful session. This session is extremely critical because at the end of the day, Kharif crops are critical because they set the stage for what the food inflation is, what the government policies are, and what the planning is going to be for the time ahead. We all know that August was the lowest rainfall that the country received in the last 122 years, and that would have a direct impact on yields, availability, and prices. And of course, gearing up for the 2024 election, it has a major impact on government policies and and the outlook for the elections coming forward. So today's expert panel is going to discuss in depth, I'm assuming without any filter, on the impact of the Kharif crops and the inflation. Leading the session will be Mr. Chandrasekhar, who is the economic advisor to IMC and a veteran of the industry. Mr. Madan Sabnavis is the chief economist for Bank of Baroda. Mrs. Rajini Lamba is the VP of Phillip Capital. And last but not the least, Dr. Goel is the former additional chief secretary for agriculture for the government of Maharashtra, and a very close advisor to not only the government but also IMC. So with that, welcome everyone, and Mr. Chandrasekhar, I'll hand it off to you for your opening comments and to start the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this warm welcome remark. Give me a moment. I need to share screen. I'll go here. Share. Yes, here it goes. Slideshow. Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, let me also mention the IMC is the only Chamber of Commerce in India to have SEBI's accreditation as a training institution for commodity derivatives. The SEBI has recognized about 25 institutions across India, but almost all of them are educational institutions. IMC is the only Chamber of Commerce, and that's a very special distinction. And I always, I'm so proud of announcing it to the world in every event that we do. Today we are here. IMC's Agribusiness and Food Processing Expert Committee has organized this. We are going to be discussing the impact of Kharif 23-24 crops on food inflation. And I'm going to very quickly make a presentation on the Kharif crop production outlook. So here it goes. Now, the first point is major crops grown in the Kharif season include rice, pulses. Pulses would include the tur or other urad and moong, core cereals, maize, bajra, jowar, oilseeds, mainly soy and groundnut, and of course cotton. Even sugarcane is harvested in October, November, although sugarcane is a 12-month crop. But its harvest coincides with the Kharif harvest. And all these crops are now ready for harvest. In fact, in some regions, harvest is actually already starting. Now, as the chairman mentioned in his welcome remark, the southwest monsoon has been suboptimal. It has ended the season with a 6% deficiency. Even a 6% deficiency should not, under normal circumstances, bother us. But what is important is not the total quantum of rainfall, but what is important is a temporal and spatial distribution of rains over the 4-month period, June, July, August, September, and the geographic spread of the southwest monsoon, which has most unfortunately been uneven, delayed onset of monsoon, 8th or 9th of June. And June also was by and large dry. July, we had good rainfall. August was very sadly extremely dry, alarmingly dry. September, of course, we caught up a little, but that is not enough. The distribution of rainfall over 4 months has not been even. And there are also incidents of pest attack, for example, pink bollworm attack on cotton in Punjab and even parts of Maharashtra. I am able to very clearly see the effect of El Nino. Its impact is clearly visible. In 21 and 22, we faced La Nina, which brings excess rainfall. El Nino is the opposite of La Nina. El Nino drives dry conditions, and this is exactly what has actually driven our southwest monsoon. And the worrying thing is this El Nino impact is going to last over the next 4 months, probably Jan and Feb, but I'll come to that a little later. Please have a look at this. Have a look at this map from the IMD. What does it show? Very clearly, this is from 1st of June till 30th of September. Eastern Uttar Pradesh, the whole of Bihar, the whole of Chhattisgarh, it is then Gangetic West Bengal, South Interior Karnataka, whole of Kerala. All this is in deficit category. Okay. In some other regions like Marathwada and even Madhya Maharashtra and parts of Rayalaseema, actually it is at the margin. It's a borderline case. It is still rainfall is in the negative territory, and according to the IMD, up to minus 19% is still normal rainfall. But in many cases, many of these meteorological subdivisions are in the borderline between normal and in deficient. Therefore, the rainfall has not been even. Rainfall has been suboptimal, and very clearly the impact of this is seen on the crops as I would show very, very quickly. How does it move? Why is it not moving? Yeah, okay. So this is actually impacted the harvest size. Now, Kharif 23-24 production, in my view, is set to fall short of the target. It will be much less than the target. The Government of India set target for the Kharif season and of course for the Rabi season also. And production of many crops is going to fall short of the designated target. And this will be the second year in a row of adverse weather impacting our crops. Even in 22 Kharif, I had presented my crop forecast well before the Government of India's first estimate, and then we saw, I think Rajini was with me last time. We were on a television show, if I recall correctly. Even that time, rice, pulses, cotton, oilseeds, all these crops were affected. And this 23-24 is going to be the second year in a row of adverse weather impacting our crop production. Now, I will show some numbers in the next slide. But last year in 2022-23, Government of India's crop estimates were overstated. And I must place it on record that it is clearly an overestimation. And it is because it was overestimated, policies were geared to suit that overestimated crops. But market is the final arbiter. Reality has started to bite, and therefore it started to bite even as far back as May 2022. And that is why the Government of India in May 22 banned export of wheat. Subsequently, it banned export of rice. It suspended export of sugar, and it's imposed stock limits on pulses and wheat, etc., etc. It has not allowed a derivatives trade for almost 2 years now. Come December, and it'll be 2 years. If the government's crop numbers of 22-23 were correct, and at least I'm convinced they were overstated. If they were correct, then there was absolutely no need for these restrictions. Okay? And therefore, I think the government needs to revisit its crop production estimate process itself. Okay. Next one. This is my what should I say? My forecast. Okay. I've given I'm sure, I hope the numbers are visible. First, I've covered all the major crops, 5-year average of acreage. What was 2022 final acreage? and what is 2022, 23, this year's final acreage, the numbers are given. Then you have production target in million tons, and my forecast of what the crop size is or would be is given. And then, of course, you have the third estimate of the Government of India for last year. I would like to compare that. Very clearly, the third estimate of the Government of India, as far as rice was concerned, soybean was concerned, cotton was concerned, were all highly overstated. And even that time, my own estimate for rice production in Kharif season was 102 to 104 million tons, but the government has refused to reduce it. In case of wheat, they did in 22. From 111, they brought it down to 107 after fellows like me made noise, spoke on television, wrote articles, etc. But anyway, this year the government's estimate has not come yet. The first advance estimate ought to have come as a matter of routine by the last week of September. Now we are in the middle of October, and there is no sign of the first advance estimate for Kharif 2023-24. So they are still probably fine-tuning these numbers. But the market doesn't wait for all this. The market knows what the reality is, and these are my numbers. I'm seeing very clearly rice production between 100 and 102 million tons. Why? Why am I saying this? You saw that map earlier. Eastern UP, Gangetic West Bengal, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, they're all deficient in rain, and that eastern part is now actually is becoming the rice bowl of India. And erratic monsoon is obviously going to impact rice yields. Same with pulses. Last year, the government's first estimate of pulses production, Kharif pulses production, was 9.3 million tons. And I challenged it, and in my own way, I wrote about the fact that it could be anything between 8.4 and 8.5 million tons. Subsequently, the government reduced it, but we also had extended rainfall the whole of October and the whole of November in 2022, if you remember, which inflicted greater damage. And that is why government number is 7.8 million tons. Okay. And with that in mind, this year, I find pulses acreage is at least 1 million hectares lower, at least 10 lakh hectares lower. On the other hand, rice, your acreage is actually 1 million tons higher. But it, notwithstanding 1 million tons higher acreage, rice production is not going to show any significant improvement. In pulses, there is already a 1 million hectare decrease as compared with last year. And therefore, these are my numbers. I don't want to go into individual pulse crop numbers, but all that's given here. Oil seeds also, the target is 28.4 million tons. I don't see the production anywhere close to that. It will be at least 10 to 12 million tons lower, of which I see soybean at between 11.5 and 12.5 million tons. Last year, government's production estimate of 15 million is completely, probably 20% overstated. And this year, my own call is that it will be 11.5 to 12.5. Let us come to sugar. Sugarcane area has jumped from 5.5 million hectares of last year to 6 million hectares this year. To my mind, this looks, I don't know if I should say artificial. Okay, I don't think sugarcane crop lends itself to this kind of a big jump, a 10% increase in acreage. That's number one. Number two, last year's government estimate of cane production 494 is highly exaggerated. It was close to 410 or 420 million tons, and we have seen all that the impact of that on sugar prices and sugar production. This year, 23-24, sugarcane production target is 470 million tons. My call, my estimate, my forecast is it will be between 400 and 420 million tons, which will give us about 30 million tons of sugar. give or take 500,000 tons, say between 29.5 and 30.5 million tons of sugar production. And when you look at 27 million tons of sugar consumption requirement in India, it will hardly leave any surplus. And that is why we have a situation where sugar exports are suspended. And I expect that this suspension will certainly continue. Cotton, the target is 35 million bales. My estimate of production, given the uneven distribution of rainfall and of course pest attack, etc., it could be between 32 and 33 million bales of cotton production. So I think I'll go quickly to the next slide. I've already consumed time. I think this is what I talked about from the previous slide, that eastern parts of India faced moisture deficiency, and therefore rice, despite a 1.1 million hectare increase in acreage, yields are going to reduce. Pulses have already faced a 1 million hectare decrease, facing moisture stress. And my big worry is, if you analyze the acreage and the Kharif pulses of the last 3-4 years, I think acreage has started to stagnate. Whether it is reaching a saturation point, I don't know, but it is certainly stagnating, and I don't see any big scope for a big expansion of Kharif pulses acreage in future. It's about 13 million hectares or so, between 13 and a half. I think it's coming to a saturation point in my view. Same with cotton. Cotton, the peak area was 13 million hectares. But look at last 2 years, it is less than 13 million hectares. This year it is 12.4 or whatever that, 12.5 million hectares. Again, in my view, cotton acreage is stagnating and possibly reaching a saturation point. I expect the supply-demand fundamentals for cotton to remain quite tight. I see there may not be enough export surplus. Possibly our export could be 1.5 to 2 million bales of cotton, and certainly not more. But I expect certainly import volumes for both pulses and cotton to actually increase. Our cotton import may probably touch 2 million tons, 2 million bales, and our pulses import also will be quite high, probably anything between 2.5 and 3 million tons. And therefore, the government has allowed pulses import tuar and urad and masoor duty-free until 31st March 2024. Sugarcane, as I said, unrealistic. I think it is unrealistic. And this kind of acreage is certainly not sustainable in the long run. We need to actually reduce the area under sugarcane. And I've commented on all this before. So this is possibly my last slide. I don't want to raise an alarm, but my big worry is not even this Kharif 23-24 crop. My big worry is the Rabi crop. I suspect El Nino may impact adversely winter rains that are so badly needed for the Rabi crop, particularly wheat. And El Nino is likely to last till Jan-Feb 2024. Already our soil moisture is not adequate at all. And if the winter rains are affected, then it can worsen the situation. And the wheat, probably for the third year in a row, I shudder to think, but can face challenges. Therefore, overall food crop availability in 23-24 is going to be a challenge. Is going to be very tightening supply-demand fundamentals, and prices are also going to pose a big challenge as far as policymakers are concerned. I think I don't want to raise an alarm, but this is something we need to take on board, that the situation is not normal, situation is not smooth. So with this, let me say thank you very much. Good luck. God bless you all. And I'm open to questions. I'm happy to explain. I would, may I now invite Dr. Goyal to share his thoughts on the Kharif situation.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Chandra sir. As usual, excellent presentation. I will be brief because we have two great speakers, Madan and we have got Majini. both great economists. Probably they will be able to do much better analysis of results which have been presented by Chandra. Now, in terms of a ex-bureaucrat, because if I were a bureaucrat right now, I would have spoken with a lot of caution. But right now, I would say that what I really feel, rainfall data when it comes from IMD, I have not seen ever a single result saying that what part of the country did not receive adequate rainfall as far as agriculture is concerned. They talk of averages. Now, this year, first time probably they listen and they say that 31% of area of the country was having a deficit, or out of that, about 2% highly deficit. 52% area is normal rainfall and 17% as excess. Now, this supports what Chandra sir was saying. It is only 52% of the area of the country which has got adequate rainfall as far as normal is concerned for agriculture. This is something which a task which can be done. I'm sure Madan can do it. And nobody does it to zero down in terms of taluka or district as to how many districts and talukas have got adequate rainfall for good agriculture. Now, that is something this data never appears. There's a little bit of data some states do, and that creates this problem of predicting or estimating the production. Now, if you start estimating everything on the basis of averages given by IMD or averages given by states, then obviously your estimates are going to be well off the marks. Then the way these figures come, I have worked in state government and I know in what way this is being done. Now there are satellite pictures. Now there are things which you can go up to the individual plots. There are ways by which one can estimate not only the yield but very accurately the area under different crops. And probably at the end of my presentation, I would say that what government of India is thinking, to what extent it will be working. Now, I immediately come to the theme of today's talk, impact of Kharif crops on food inflation. I'm not an expert on inflation, but I would say as an administrator, the demand is something which does not change drastically. Demand is having a pattern. Right. And this pattern is not changing from year to year. It in fact changes from decade to decade. And that is how this is, if the demand is predictable, the inflation would be decided by the supply side. Now, if the supply side is not being estimated properly, obviously you will have these issues of at the fag end, you start doing the imports, imports opening and exports restrictions and stock limits and so on. Madan recently wrote a beautiful article in Mint. He says that MSP, the stock limits, and this export-import policy is the culprit. He says there is nobody else who is the culprit. He is not saying that the nature is the culprit. Now, these are the kinds of policies which are there, which create this kind of a situation of food inflation. So the demand being fairly stable, in terms of supply, the unpredictability obviously will come from the monsoon. I always say the monsoon and the markets are the two monsters. So unpredictable monsoon, and we know that now we know what is the situation in the last 4 months. Then comes this inaccurate estimation, and there is a whole lot of things which is going on. All of us know the debate going on in two ministries. One say wheat production was 113 million ton. The other ministry says no, it was 103 million ton. These are two wings of the government of India fighting with each other. One one is for Ministry of Agriculture, it still maintains 113 million ton. And Consumer Affairs says no. Ministry of Food says no, it was 103. Anyway, So this is what the situation is. Then there are, so supply side is also affected by archaic domestic policies. And in terms of MSP, in terms of stock limits, and also in terms of supply side is your unpredictable policies as far as imports and exports are concerned. There is no long-term declaration that this is what we are going to do. You have estimated what is going to be the production. You can also, well, the very beginning, you can say this will be our export policy for such and such crop, or for the next 12 months or 10 months or whatever period is there. Now, if this is the situation that the demand can be very accurately predicted and the supply side you are having lots of uncertainties, then who gets benefited out of this situation? Frankly speaking, nobody. But somebody who gets benefited is in between, who always thrives on this unpredictability, the trade. The trade is much more smart than government. The trade is much more smart than the consumers. And the trade have the ears, as the Chandra sir was saying, is that they know how the market behaves. Rather, even if you stop having your derivatives, but still they have their own sources to find out as to how the, so in between farmers and consumers is the trade. And if you see from the point of view of analysis which is there, who would be the culprit if there is a food inflation? Now, obviously, one would say, no, farmers are not adopting good technology. If they would have adopted the proper technologies, they would have able to take care of excess monsoon and also the deficit monsoon if they were following those kinds of technologies which the universities at Nosium has been advocating that. But I don't think we can blame them for such kind of a situation, because for 85% small and marginal farmers to say that they can control, even if ag-tech companies are there and everyone says that we can take care of them, I don't think we can blame. Obviously, government policies we have said in what way this creates problem. So in terms of inaccurate estimates, in terms of putting restrictions, in terms of changing policies. So I would say one of the culprits is the government's own action or own inaction, which creates such kind of a situation. Nature, we have already said that nature plays its own role. You cannot blame nature, whether it's El Nino or La Nina. This is a part of nature. That is, whether you call it God's creation, you are not going to control. But major part which is played is by trade. Now, some of the traders may be happy with me saying that why we are seeing this. It's nothing wrong. The traders' understanding of demand supply situation is probably the best. And they are able to find out where are the surplus and where are the demands, and they are able to work out in the market and reach to a situation that they will be able to take advantage of the situation. On one side, the farmers is looking for remunerative prices. But we know when the crop arises, however small the crop may be, the prices crash. And because it's a local phenomenon, warehouses are few, the pledge loan is 50,000 crores against your entire production of 25 lakh of your entire agricultural GDP of the GDP of the order of 50 lakh crores. On one side, that is the situation, that though they are looking for remunerative prices, they get affected by the price situation, and they also get affected by the risk, and they are not able to take care of that. Insurance being what it is, not still stabilized. On the other hand, the consumers are looking, and they are always hungry for the low prices of whatever situation may be. And though, in spite of such a situation in between the trader, when they are buying at a rate which probably is not what the consumer is paying in the end. And so they are making both of them unhappy. I'm not saying that they need to be blamed, They the problem being they are the only people who can connect these two. And if the farm laws are no longer there and the government takes them away, then whatever alternatives were to be created to APMCs have gone not forever, but for quite some time. So who has taken the place of such organization instead of the kind of farm laws which would have created? To certain extent FPOs, but not very strong. Their number is 25,000 registered, but very few of them are able to take care of this situation to be an aggregator. AgTech companies. Now, 10,000 of them are registered, but still their impact in terms of connecting farmers and consumers is still very much limited. SMEs are there. So what needs to be done if we want to control this situation? Point number one. All of us have heard about agri-stack. Now, this agri-stack is something where each and every plot will be geotagged. Their area will be known. The crop will be recorded. The ownership will be there. And this data is supposed to be made available in 2 or 3 years' time. And there are lots of claims from government of India. If that is the situation, then there is a possibility of monitoring sowing operations and harvesting operations and the crop yields digitally on a platform. A dynamic prediction is possible, a dynamic monitoring is possible. And that is the time when one will be able to see very clearly the demand and supply situation, not only at the national level, but also at the local. And if that is the situation, one will be able to take the corrective actions. The second suggestion which I want to make is the warehousing and pledging. If we introduce it in a big way, there is a possibility that the inflation which we are talking about, the farmers will be the real beneficiary of whatever increase takes place because of demand and supply situation, not the traders, because they will be able to take the pledge loan against the small quantities which they have deposited. RA.AG with 11,000 warehouses is already doing it. And then there have to be some enablers who are able to take care of this entire value chain, connecting farmers to the consumers. And these value chain enablers, as I said earlier, could be FPO, AgTech, SMEs, and if we are able to encourage that in such a situation where the farmers and consumers both are winner in this process of demand supply situation, that will be a great deal. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Absolute words of wisdom from a veteran, what should I say, bureaucrat who's been tracking and working to generate policies for the agriculture sector. Absolutely taken. One or two observations. One, the latest is that the government of India started what is called UP-Ag, which is Unified Portal for Agriculture Statistics. It'll get operational quite soon, and the intention is to generate more authentic data and share with people on a real-time basis. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We need to wait how it is operationalized. This is number one. Number two, the government now realizes the inaccuracy of its own data because the RBI's numbers and RBI's response to crops, crop size, etc., and prices is very different from what bureaucrats in the food ministry or consumer affairs ministry talk about, as you rightly said. So I think there is a realization, therefore they are trying to improve. And in this process of improvement, we need to use technology. As Dr. Saab rightly said, we need to use, for example, satellite technology to track vegetation. Multiple technologies, in fact, that should be adopted. And therefore, I think we will. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. I'm sure there'll be questions if we have time for question answer after all the panelists have spoken. I'll now invite Rajni to share her thoughts.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, sir, for allowing me this opportunity to speak on the Kharif crops. I will just share my screen. Just give me a minute. Just a minute.
Yeah, but it's visible. I think we can
Yeah, I was just hoping to make it full screen.
full screen. Yeah.
So that's just what I'm trying to do. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, so like Chandrasekhar sir said that I think the key to my presentation will be the production estimates that we have in-house. I will quickly the other slides of mine perhaps are just more reiteration on what has been earlier spoken. So quickly jumping in to the topic at hand, which is Kharif crop and inflation impact. Of course, every production estimate will needlessly begin with El Nino, because after a period of 3 years of La Nina, which brought about good rains, but unfortunately, which was scattered, and global warming impact, we did have not so very good monsoon even last year and its production impact. And this year we are into El Nino. And this typically, as has been said earlier, brings about less rainfall for the northern hemisphere, more rainfall during the southern hemisphere, creating global production impact. And of course, India also gets impacted with that. This is a slide that I present every year, but I think its importance is there because it's the critical link to why we need to discuss this year after year. That is because, one, the large contribution that agriculture still has in India as GDP, that is, it contributes about 18% of the gross value to India's GDP, and close to 50% of the population still depend on agriculture. A large portion of the agriculture, unfortunately, is still rain-fed. So we have about 48% of food grain production still being rain-fed. And of that 48%, nearly 75% comes from southwest monsoon. So that's why we have to do this year after year, because we are still largely rain-fed. At least 50% of the agriculture still is rain-fed. And therefore, southwest monsoon, which brings about 75% of the rainfall, therefore its importance. And why southwest monsoon? Apart from the rainfall it contributes, also the production that happens during the summer months, or the Kharif season, contributes to about 50% of the food grain that is produced in the country, of around 300 million tons. It contributes about 70% of the 37 million tons of oil seeds that gets produced. So therefore the importance, and therefore we will need to discuss this again and again because its importance cannot be wished away. El Nino, quickly, because a lot has been discussed. So what I want to take you through perhaps is that in 7 decades, we've had about 15 times when we've had El Nino. Whenever India has seen El Nino years, we have seen deficient to below normal rainfalls. And in the current season also, we are more or less we are below normal, because we are around 94% of the long period averages where we are going to end the year. But most importantly is this study by Bloomberg, which did an econometric model on what happens to inflation, and they quoted India as well during El Nino years. Now, the econometric model says that during El Nino years, on an average in India's case, it tends to increase inflation by about 0.5%, 50 basis point, and therefore cuts our economic growth or the GDP by the equivalent amount. So that is quantifying what we've been discussing in terms of El Nino's impact on inflation and GDP, and we thought that that's an interesting data to present. This is, of course, a graphical presentation of what Chandrasekhar sir has already said, the spatial distribution, the periodic distribution. We've had a topsy-turvy monsoon this year, June. We therefore, because of the deficient monsoon, most of the Kharif crops planting started late. In July, we had an improvement. In August, it is, of course, very well documented, one of the most driest of months. And then again in September, a bit improving. Most importantly, in terms of forecast, since we just kind of summarized that IMD said that we would be at the early stage forecast, that we would be about 96% of the LPA. And what at the end of the season, we can say that though the forecast was 96, IMD has not been far behind because it has been about 94%. So it's below normal rainfall that they had projected, and we are more or less the projection close to the projections as we end the southwest monsoons. This is again a quick representation that I put in every year as to which are the particular months that requires a maximum amount of rainfall, which is, as we know, towards June, July. That's when most of the planting gets into it starts, and which is very critical. Then, of course, towards the Kharif, towards the production stage, and then, of course, September is when harvest begins, where we don't actually require that much rainfall. But what we have seen, because of the pattern of rainfall, starting late, then increasing, then going again, the planting phase starting has now shifted the window. Instead of starting of June, now more or less most of the Kharif gets planted, in fact, towards July, and therefore the entire table has shifted, and therefore perhaps we need to relook at the implications of when exactly a monsoon hits, and will it really have that much of an adverse impact on production, because the entire window of production has changed. And we've looked into that, and this year these are the final acreage estimates from Government of India. And the worst hit has been the short duration pulses crops, because they missed that critical window, and therefore we see acreage getting shifted to the other longer duration crops. So it's pulses acreage that has got impacted the most, behind, of course, the oilseeds acreage, which also has seen and a lower impact because of this entire shift of monsoon starting on a later phase. What is more, of course, critical is what influences, apart from weather, the Kharif production, which is, of course, the MSP. And on that part, as the speaker before me correctly said, the bureaucracy has done what it could do in terms of encouraging production, which is increasing the MSP. But unfortunately, because of the weather adversities, despite we seeing a significant improvement in pulses, MSPs, acreage actually not being able to put up pace with it because of the fact that monsoons got delayed and the shorter duration crops could not be planted. This, of course, is what we wanted to discuss more critically, which is what our production estimate is. So we have put here the area, which is the government area for rice, for pulses. We've not gone into the smaller crops. We've just broadly classified the Kharif crops, which is rice, cereals, pulses, cotton, and oil seeds. So the area is taken from the government estimates. Yield is what we have looked at trends, at our own proprietary research to come up with production estimates. And yes, the scenario does not look very comfortable, despite monsoons increasing or getting normalized towards September. But we think that the yields are going to get impacted, and therefore what we have done is the production that we've put here in this column is our estimates, compared it with the final estimates of what the government numbers is. So we are forecasting about 13% decline in rice production, and this we believe is more or less because of the deficient rains in UP, West Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Odisha. And this not only impacted the pace and timing of planting, but even during critical crop development stage, the lack of rainfall has impacted the production. So in fact, I think our production numbers are lower than what Chandrasekhar sir is estimating. We are looking at a crop somewhere around 95 to 100 million tons compared to 110 million tons last year. Similarly, for Kharif, the coarse cereals, we believe that the impact may not be as drastic as the ones that we are estimating for rice as well as for pulses. Pulses, again, weak rainfall in June impacted acreage, as I've discussed earlier. The driest month of August on record could have also impacted yields negatively by as much as 10%. And because this was when the crop was just entering the grain development stage. A steeper decline in yields, however, we believe has been prevented because of the improvement rains in September. Now, if we jump to cotton, there we are seeing, we estimate the production to be about 320 lakh bales compared to 343 lakh bales last year. It's about a 7% decline. Again, because of not just rainfall having impacted, but also there are reports of pest infestations in northern states already that is coming up. Oilseeds, again, because of the lower acreage as well as the yield adversity. Of course, not as impacted as pulses, as rice, because we are a little more stringent over the adversity that oilseeds crop can now bear has got better over the years. So therefore, we believe that the oilseed production year over year could be down by about 4%. So this is, in a nutshell, what we believe the impact of monsoons, the topsy-turvy monsoons over this last 4 months could have an impact on the Kharif production. We have this slide that we put every year, which is our estimates of what inflation will look like. So overall, there is inflation because of towards the October, November, December, the OND quarter, because of the arrival pressure that will come in from Kharif crops, we are seeing CPI as well as food and beverage inflation to come down from what it is currently. So we are definitely looking at or forecasting a CPI inflation to come down below the sticky 6% numbers. But having said that, a lot will depend, but there is going to be an upside bias, as you can see by our forecast going upwards towards March compared to the October to December period. And that largely is because of the food crop estimates of the Kharif crops that we are estimating to be lower than last year. What will be, of course, monitored very closely will be how the winter rain happens, what its impact on Rabi crop will be. Will Rabi crop be able to offset some of the declines in the Kharif crop? This is perhaps what the question that remains unanswered. So therefore, putting all this together, we are of the opinion that yes, some amount of inflation pressure we are forecasting to be lower towards the end of the year with an upside bias. And of course, the forecast will change depending on how the winter rainfall and the winter crop production comes across. So that's what we wanted to share today. I hope it was helpful and worth the time that you're
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rajini. Awesome, as always, absolutely focused with all the relevant numbers. Very, very interesting. You've really put things in context. Very important. Now we come to the most crucial part, and that most crucial part will, of course, be handled by our friend Madan. As far as the crop production and its impact on inflation, and let us also not forget the global factors that are playing out. Crude oil, which is again another inflationary factor, which we need to take on board. But I'm sure Madan is going to handle all of that all by himself. Madan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chandrasekhar, and good afternoon to everyone. You know, what we have seen in the last few years is that we've been getting very good news in terms of production of various agricultural crops. And normally we tend to focus on rice and wheat. And every year we hear that there is a new peak production level which has been achieved, which I think is very good. But at the same time, we have seen that there have been a lot of price pressures which have come through. So today, when we are saying that cereal inflation is high, it is primarily on account of inflation, especially of rice, which is very high today. And last year, we also had a case of wheat. So I think in this discussion, I think the other panelists, what they've been talking of about whether these numbers which are being released officially, whether these numbers tend to be overstated or not is obviously a doubt which is there. Because we should remember that a large part of some of these crops is not really the marketable surplus. It doesn't really enter the market. So there are actually estimates which are being drawn up by various methodologies which are used. But the fact that high supplies does not necessarily mean that prices come down is a kind of a puzzle which all of us have faced. Add to this the fact that the government has relentlessly been increasing the MSPs. So MSPs is actually an issue which I think we've been debating for a very long time, whether it's really relevant or not, whether we should move more towards a market-oriented system. But what we have seen in the last 5 years at least is that the MSPs are increased by an average of 5 to 7 to 8% across various crops, both for Kharif as well as Rabi. Now, what really happens here is that while there is a procurement which is there for rice and wheat, maybe at certain points of time, certain state governments do procure pulses, the MSPs tend to distort prices. So the moment we say there is a minimum support price being provided by the government, automatically the benchmark prices in the market tend to move upwards. Now, there can always be this issue of saying that we want to protect the interests of farmers, but when we are protecting the interests of farmers, at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for it. So the consumer pays for us. Otherwise, there's no reason why we should be having MSPs for all the crops where the government actually buys only rice and wheat, because you have a PDS program, you have a buffer stocking program, and therefore there is an end use for these particular crops. And here too, as we know very well, these are open-ended schemes. Open-ended meaning, as a farmer, hypothetically, if I produce 50 million tons of wheat and give it to the Food Corporation of India, it has to procure it. It has to pay for it. So I think when we are talking of inflation of agricultural crops, I think one thing is that there is some kind of a separation of supplies, that is the demand supply things, and that's what Goyalji had spoken about, saying that demand doesn't really change. So it's basically a case of supply. But here I'm saying that even if supplies are very good, there's no guarantee that your prices are going to come down. Inflation would tend to increase, because we always want to take sides. We want to side with the farmer. We want to side with the consumer. So I think that's the basic crux which is there, which leads to inflation. The second part which I've noticed is that we always say there's a normal monsoon. So the normal monsoon of 4% below, 3% below, 6% below may actually not mean much, because these are aggregate numbers which we're looking at. And as Chandrasekhar meant, we need to see how it is spread. But more important is the timing. So the timing is also important. And what we miss out is that sometimes excessive rainfall, like what we have seen in Northwest India, Central India, has actually damaged crops. So that kind of information is something which we keep getting sporadically. At the end of the day, we also see that in the months of October, at least until last year, there was a very late withdrawal of the monsoon, which also led to the destruction of certain crops. And that is something which turned out to be inflationary. So today, when we are looking in terms of food inflation, we should remember that food inflation is something which is very hard for one to guess. We can, on the basis of monsoon numbers, or even in terms of the output numbers. There are problems. I mean, these are the best inputs which we have. So therefore, logically, we have to look at the monsoon, look at the spread and say, okay, these particular crops have received good monsoons. So therefore, the output should be good. But will the prices really come down? We're not really quite sure about it. Because I remember when I learned economics in school, we normally said that when supplies increase at the time of harvest, prices should actually be coming down. But prices never come down today, because we have this thing called the MSP. So there are certain forces which also ensure that the prices remain at an elevated level, notwithstanding what happens to the crop. Now, another factor which we miss out is that whenever we talk of Kharif crops and in food inflation, we're looking at the crops. I mean, I say crops meaning we're looking at rice, wheat, so on and so forth. But just maybe a month and a half back, 1.5 months back, we had a problem which happened with tomatoes, which actually spooked inflation. So horticulture is another very vulnerable crop, and we have seen that the onion syndrome has been pervading almost every year. Hopefully this year we won't have it. It's because of excessive rainfall affecting the onion crop, and that is something which comes in the way of overall supplies, which affects prices. So inflation would always tend to hover around this particular range of 7 to 8%, at least I'm talking of in this current financial year, primarily on account of all these factors. Now we have the MSP on one hand, we have supplies which may not, I mean, the output numbers may not actually, may be overstated, they may not be as high as what we are, we think they are. And then about these other crops which don't enter into the traditional Kharif basket are the ones which are also getting affected. So today, if I look at this food inflation, or the food and beverages inflation, for example, we're running at around 9%. Headline inflation is something which probably today we have a number coming out for September. It could be probably in the region of around 5.6, 5.7%. For the entire year, we're saying inflation is going to be around 5.5%. 5.4 is what the RBI is talking of. And core inflation, which is a non-food, non-fuel inflation, is running below 5%. So that's a very good sign, which means that the inflation is actually coming through because of the food products. So I think this Kharif crop, the dynamics which go on is going to be very, very critical when we're looking at this headline number, because whenever the RBI is cautious of saying that there is an upside risk which is there, it's essentially because we really don't know what's the actual crop numbers. And I think an important part which has come from the monsoon data which we look at is the reservoir levels. The reservoir levels are much lower than what they were last year. Now, this reservoir levels become important because A, they provide water for drinking purposes, B, it provides for cattle, and C, it also provides the water which is required for the Rabi crop. Now, if the reservoir levels are lower, I forget which of the regions, probably just one region has something close to last year, otherwise they generally are lower. They could definitely be a problem even in terms of the Rabi crops. So I think this is one of the reasons as to why the RBI has been very, very conservative when they're looking at inflation. And today, if I'll take a broader view of saying that, why is it that the RBI can be expected to keep the repo rate at where it is right up till the end of this financial year? It's primarily because we don't quite know what's going to happen to food inflation and therefore headline inflation. So while headline inflation by the RBI's forecast itself is going to come to the lowest level of 5.2 in the fourth quarter, and it will continue to be 5.2% even in the first quarter of next year, it actually means that there's going to be a status quo on interest rates for a very long period of time. And the joker in the pack is food prices. So this is going to be a very critical component for us. And add to this the fact that today we have seen this problem in Israel. So what Chandrasekhar has spoken of, it's not really related to Kharif, but today our inflation numbers are all going to get affected also by the fact that the crude oil price going up is something which the government can protect my CPI by not increasing my fuel prices. But however, when I'm talking of WPI, it's going to come in. WPI inflation could be going up. Not just the WPI inflation going up, but even products related to which are dependent on crude oil, such as fertilizers. So I think what we looked at what the World Bank numbers on inflation for different products. It's very heartening because most of the agricultural products, actually the prices have come down, they're very benign. However, if I look at fertilizer prices, urea, that is something which has started going up. So that is something which we also import, which has potential to also spook my agricultural prices. Because my input cost goes up, my final price will also be under pressure. Therefore, there could be inflation coming from that particular point of view. The second part which we have seen is, I think, rice. I don't know if India has contributed to this particular factor, because the moment you ban the export of rice from India, today in the globalized world, it automatically spooks the prices. Just like last year, we saw a shortage of production in wheat at the global level. India wanted to import, the prices went up, and therefore we had wheat inflation. So I think we have a global factor is going to play a minimal role, but definitely it also has a role to play. That is something which we have to monitor. And the crude oil price going up on account of developments which take place in the Arab world. As of today, we have seen that since Monday to Thursday hasn't been any kind of an impact, even in terms of crude oil prices. But we can keep a thumb rule saying that, I don't know if Chandrasekhar agrees with me here, if Rajni agrees with me here, if we cross $90 per barrel on a sustained basis, there could be a problem. That means the government will have to take some decision, because if I don't want to increase the fuel prices because it's an election year, then who's going to bear the cost? That's one part of the economics. The second part is that the related products, we've already seen ATF prices have gone up. So airlines are increasing the prices, fertilizer prices going up. That is something which would come back into the overall system. So on the whole, I think it's a wait and watch kind of thing which we'll have to follow. And I think the ultimate manifestation of price of your output will actually be in terms of prices. So today, if I see pulses prices going up, in fact, I have a slightly different view from Chandrasekhar, because I think pulse prices, especially food, is going to be lower this year. And that is something which I'm seeing in the market. Almost every week when I go into Star Bazaar, which is a medium kind of thing between the Kirana store and the high price shops, I see that the price is going up by 3-4 rupees every week. So we are having a problem. And you talk to some of the dealers, they say that this is not because we have low stocks now, but because we expect the new stock not to be that good. So for all of us who like our idlis and dosas, I think urad is going up, tur dal is going up, sambar prices are going to go up, and that's also getting reflected in the restaurants when you go and eat, not just when we are buying our own groceries. So there is definitely going to be a lot of pressure which is going to be on food prices. I don't think there's need for one to panic, but to expect that food inflation is going to come down from this 9% to 3-4%, I think is definitely can be ruled out. There are going to be continuous pressures out there. The positive part is that imported inflation, at least on oil, on edible oils, maybe will not be there. Unlike last year, where we saw that edible oils inflation had gone up. This year, I think since international prices are fairly benign, I think there was some fear that this El Nino may affect production of palm oil. And since we import palm oil, that could be some imported inflation. But I think those fears can probably be put aside because I've seen these prices have actually started coming down. So on the whole, I think it should be a more of a cautious approach when you're looking at inflation. I think the current levels moving gradually down is what Rajni said. I would agree. 9% you come down slowly towards 6% mark, but an upside risk definitely exists. But in terms of the sheer production numbers, I think there is need for, I mean, there's no better way, I'm sure, because we all have, I think Chandrasekhar has different estimates from what Rajni has, and all of us look at it differently. And since most of these things don't really enter the mandis, there's no formal way in which we know what are the output numbers. It's a lot of it is based on different methodologies which are formed, but we have to accept it because I think that's the way in which data is collected for almost any economic variable. You never get the most perfect one. But definitely when we go to the market by higher prices, we know that inflation is high. So I think we will continue with these elevated inflation rates for agricultural products. Kharif, I think we should also watch out for the Rabi crops. I think chana is one example, chana, mustard, wheat. These are the three major crops. I think that's what we'll have to actually watch out, whether the production numbers turn out to be right or wrong. And just the last point is that in the past, I think when we had problems on rice and wheat, we should remember that the government had a very, I would say it was one of the greatest programs of providing free food to everyone. They started off with wheat. We ran short of stocks on wheat, then they substituted it with the rice. Now that we're out of this particular stage of COVID, I think we can be very optimistic that this rice and wheat pressures which we had in the last couple of years will not get replicated again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madan. Wonderful analysis. So the kind of conclusion is that be ready to face high levels of inflation. I think that's the bottom line. But one or two points. As Dr. Goel mentioned, it is not the demand side. Demand rises very gradually over a period of time. It is a supply shock. It is a supply shock which usually drives the market. And when you have excess supply, obviously prices tend to decline. And when you have a shortage, prices tend to go up. It's common sense, all of us know. But what many people actually overlook is that, including bureaucrats that I have interacted with in Delhi, that they think if production goes down by 1%, prices will go up by 1%. I tell them there is no such correlation. If your production goes down by 1%, prices will go up by 5%. If your production is down 5%, prices will go up by 15%. There will be a disproportionately larger impact on prices, given the kind of supply shock. So this is one point I thought I must make. And number two, I found, at least in the last 2 or 3 years, much of government's policy response is based on government's own overstated numbers, which now it is coming to realize that it is overstated, and therefore now they are now willing and open to discussing with even the private sector participants, etc. I remember, and I'm sure Madan will bear me out, within SEBI, the CDAC in SEBI, we had discussed, I had made a couple of presentations on global and Indian market outlook. And we had made a strong pitch for setting up a commercial intelligence and research desk, which was in principle approved by SEBI, and it's gone to the finance ministry. But I don't know in the last 1 year what has happened. I haven't heard anything, anything at all. I think there is a lot more work to be done in the area of commercial intelligence and research as far as commodities are concerned, and more particularly agriculture commodities, looking at global market drivers, looking at global market dynamics, and of course our own domestic market drivers and dynamics. And then we come to the role of the traders. Often there is a tendency to blame the traders for high inflation. I'm not saying every trader is an innocent man, but we must also recognize that the traders perform a fantastic job of distributing essential commodities across the country. The distributive trade has often risen to the occasion and done and acquitted itself quite creditably and quite well. But I find, for example, within the Government of India, the Consumer Affairs Ministry, the secretary keeps issuing threats to traders saying, I'll take penal action, no holding, no black marketing, no this. They have already squeezed, reduced substantially the stock ceiling, etc., etc. And yet prices are not declining. And that actually is a reflection of very poor understanding of the supply and demand fundamentals. And unless we recognize this ground reality that supply and demand are not in sync, actually supplies are far below what the demand would indicate. I think this kind of a threat or warning or caution will always be hanging over the heads of traders. And therefore that is something all of us we have to talk about. And I can actually take you to 2015-16. We had 4 seasons of back-to-back poor monsoon, and pulses prices started to rise. It is the private sector which imported very, very large quantities and distributed pulses across the country. But despite that, prices remained high because we had very, very poor supplies. And yet there were raids on a number of companies. If I remember all that we have lived through these times, and finally, what came out? Nothing came out. They were all exonerated after inquiry. Therefore, the point is, we need within the government. My strong sense is there's a very strong need for a commercial intelligence and research desk to be manned by people who understand these markets. And without that, the finance ministry, food ministry, consumer affairs, agriculture, or commerce, all these are working in silos, and there's hardly any coordination. That's again another what should I say, tragedy or another weakness within the system which probably needs to be addressed very strongly. I'm actually now thinking whether to open up the floor for Q&A, or I would request each one of the panelists, if you have any further points to make. Dr. Saab, you have any further point to make? Rajni, Madan, yeah.
I just want to say that if we replace long disjointed value chain
Yeah.
by localized small value chain,
Right.
where the local players are able to connect the farmers with the consumers,
Yes.
this problem of inflation gets resolved largely on the basis of such kind of an arrangement. Thank you.
Right. I understand. Anything, Rajni? Any further thoughts on what we are discussing?
No, I don't think I want to add anything. I think I'm good. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Madan?
Yeah, just one thing to add, because I think
Sure.
you had mentioned this thing of traders. And I think
Yeah.
just for the audience,
Yeah.
I think we should remember one thing, that almost every crop is produced once a year.
Yeah.
Okay, rice may be having a bit of rabi, but every crop is produced once a year. And then it is supplied through for 365 days until the next harvest comes in. So the question is that when this has to be made available throughout the year, somebody has to take on this responsibility. So again, I'm not a spokesperson for traders. I don't know who are traders. I've never met a trader. But you should remember that the traders or the intermediaries, they do a very useful job, because you have to procure from the farmers. The farmer does not have the wherewithal to hold on to it and sell it through the year. The person wants his money. So you have somebody who needs to buy it, you need to store it, you need to transport it to multiple locations, you need to take on the risk of damage which could take place in terms of packaging, in case what way is required. I think this entire business has to be done. So therefore, there is a certain kind of a value which is being added. Now, it is true that when the market conditions change, there will be a reason for a person to profit from it. So that is something which you cannot leave out. But there is a cost of doing all this funds. The person is actually borrowing from banks, paying an interest rate, and is doing this particular service. So when the government talks about stock limits, I personally feel it does not make too much of sense, because let's assume that these traders are not, nobody does it. Then how will the crop be available? How will the product be made available to us throughout the year? In fact, if you look at the biggest hoarder of food grains, is the Food Corporation of India.
Government.
Being done by the government. Okay. So therefore, I think one has to use their judgment whenever we are talking of things like stock limits, or even in case we think of criticizing the traders who are profiteering from it. And very often I have seen in these kind of situations, the difference between the wholesale and the retail prices, okay, this is again based on the Ministry of Consumer Affairs data, is not significantly high. In fact, the years when we have high prices, the difference actually narrows down. Like if your tomato prices, for example, in the wholesale market went up to 100, your retail market will be 110. Whereas when it's 20, it could still be 30 in the retail market. So therefore, there are limits to which the traders will also increase the prices. So we just need to have a balanced view when we're looking at this concept of traders as well as stock limits.
Absolutely, point taken, which means we need to have a lot more efficient supply chain. That is what is important. And as Dr. Goyal said, if you have a localized supply chain, that can potentially be more efficient and possibly more sustainable. But I think we must, looking at the medium to long term, I think because this country is and will continue to face challenges of land constraint, water shortage, climate change. We can't wish away the three challenges. I think it is for the policymakers to formulate policies for boosting production. Most of the crops, the production has actually not risen in the last 4 or 5 years. Some numbers may be coming out, but commensurate with if it is commensurate with our target of 5 trillion economy, etc., I think we need to do multiple initiatives. We need to take multiple initiatives, including infusing agriculture with multiple technologies for boosting production and for making our supply chain more efficient, whether it is information and communication technology, biotechnology, nuclear agriculture technology, satellite technology, nanotechnology, drones, whatever. All these have to come into play. But for this, the government needs government has to display a certain political will that we will bring technology to boost India's agriculture production and supply chain and distribution. I think that's very critical, and I would think it is possible. It is the responsibility of chambers of commerce and trade association to speak about this and bring all this to the notice and knowledge of the policymakers, engage with them, talk to them, tell them the real on ground problems and realities. I think that's important. Shall we open? Shall we go through the chat box and see what are the questions? Are we okay? Let's have a look. 1 minute. Okay, it says, with inadequate monsoon impact on food inflation, what action can be taken? From when you say what action, I would think the government has taken some action. Obviously, they have suspended exports, they have banned export or suspended export, they have imposed stock limits, they have kept interest rates high. But what can households do? Is there a response, Madan?
No, I think that what the government normally does is putting controls.
Yeah,
I think the whole idea should be, can we actually augment the supplies? If supply is an
Yes,
issue, we need to
yes,
augment supplies. We have to look at ways of
yes.
increasing supplies.
Correct.
And this, I think what you were talking of market intelligence is important because you need to do it before the event. We have seen in the past also when we had onion problems,
Correct.
you have tenders, you have to follow those systems. And by the time the onions came to the port, I think the problem had actually passed us also.
Correct.
So I think that's the only way. And also let's remember one thing, that we can never have a perfect system. We cannot always expect that prices to be low. There will always be phases where prices will increase and they will remain stable. So I think we have to be prepared for inflation. We cannot say that I want zero inflation or just 2% inflation in agricultural products.
Sir, in my opinion, as long as farmers get a larger share of consumers' rupee, any kind of trade is acceptable. And that is going to be the biggest antidote against inflation. If my share in the consumer's rupee is reducing with time,
Correct, exactly.
I would neither produce nor be enthusiastic to have a better technology to be used, nor I am going to make investments in storage and so on. So I am not against trade, I am against that kind of trade which is not willing to share the larger share of consumers' rupee with farmers.
Yes, doctor, point taken. In fact, what Madan had said very clearly, most of government's actions are reactive. We need proactive decision making. I'll give an example. As early as we are now in the month of October, as early as May 2023, I have spoken and written about the need for the government of India to examine import of wheat. 22, we had a poor crop, a much lower crop than the target. 23, again, because of the heat wave for 2 years running, our crop was low. Food Corporation of India's procurement was far below their target. Prices started to rise, and therefore the government banned export of wheat in May 2022. And I've been arguing for import of wheat, and I talked about 3 alternatives. One, government should import from Russia on rupee payment terms, G to G account. Second, government should, or alternatively, government should allow the private sector to import, but waive the customs duty. Number 3, government should buy call option contract from an exchange like CBOT, pay a premium, obviously, and then, if need be, exercise the call and import. Otherwise, of course, the premium goes away. But that's the call government had to take. They did none of this. And in my meeting with the food secretary last month, and I said all this. I said, it's all on record. You have done nothing, and today we are facing such a serious situation as far as wheat is concerned. And then your next wheat crop looks very suspicious, very doubtful because of a moisture situation. And therefore, I think he understood what the point is. Then he said, Chandrasekhar, as of 1st July, we should have 27 million tons. FCA has 30 million tons. And therefore, we are in surplus. I said, sir, these numbers are fine. I agree. You are in a 3 million ton theoretical surplus. But for a country which is used to 20, 25, 30 million tons of wheat surplus, the very fact that your surplus has come down to barely 3 million tons itself is a very negative signal for the market. and therefore that is why prices will start rising. And therefore, this is exactly what is happening in our country. We, particularly rice and wheat, our country is used to huge surpluses with FCI, and all those surpluses are now declining, and that's obviously having an impact on the market. Therefore, I think final policymakers have to understand the market sentiment, market psychology, how to map the market thought, what the market is thinking. They should be able to map it nicely. But we, okay, okay, what action can be taken? Okay,
I need to leave Chandrasekhar in next 3 minutes.
Okay,
Madan.
Well, very quickly, are there any specific Kharif crop that have a more substantial impact on food inflation compared to others? Will rice have a bigger impact, or oilseeds have a bigger impact, Madan?
I think all of them, in fact,
All
because
of them,
I think
all of
pulses are probably the most vulnerable one,
Correct,
because we
correct.
see that we're the largest producer, consumer, import prices also go up. We've
correct,
seen it in
correct.
Mozambique, started increasing the
Correct,
prices when we
correct,
wanted to import tour.
Correct, very true. As weather is getting more unpredictable, are there any pulse crops which are more resistant to, or other crops which are more resistant to weather changes? Dr. Saab, any thoughts on how do we make our agriculture more resilient and more? I think Maharashtra government has a project. What is that?
Project on climate resilience.
Climate smart agriculture.
Climate smart, yeah. And wherever we are able to take care of the soil moisture security.
Yeah.
I coined this term SMS. The soil moisture security. You provide that security, you are able to save the crop, and then you don't require a huge amount of water. You require only moisture security.
Yeah. I understand. Madan, I think there's one more question. Will geopolitical issues impact inflation? And will there be any ban on export? Anyway.
No, I think geopolitical issue is something to be affecting more of crude oil. I don't think agriculture will come, because neither Israel nor Palestine are involved in.
How can government be better prepared, and how will they respond to El Nino events to minimize their adverse effect on crops? Any thoughts, Rajini? What should the government do?
I think it is the reason that El Nino plays the major impact is also because of one of the factors that I did present, which is that we are largely still rain-fed. So of course the reservoir levels also, which Madan touched upon, therefore gets impacted. But if of course, because of the monsoon, the reservoir level. But if we have more perhaps rain harvesting techniques, more in terms of irrigation, because I think for India in 2023, we still have nearly 48-50, which is close to 50% of our agriculture, contributing 18% to GDP, being rain-fed. And therefore, our dependence on whether it's El Nino or La Nino, I think there is definitely better that we can do. In fact, when you were talking about different technologies, I think water harvesting, irrigation, the basic we have to put into place before we get into nanotechnology or satellites or whatever. I think that is one thing that apart from increasing yields, the two things that has not changed ever since the start of my career is that the yields of most of the crops in India don't change, and it's been a long 25 years or so. And the second is our dependence on rainfall has not reduced. Our economy is now close to 5 trillion and growing, but the yields don't change, the dependence on monsoon doesn't change. I think there's something amiss, definitely. So that is something that we need to work on. Quite logical, but I don't know why, what is missing.
I agree. 40 years ago, we heard Indian agriculture is a gamble on the monsoon. I think it still remains a gamble.
Exactly.
I think sorry, say it again.
No, can you excuse me? I have to leave.
Yeah, exactly. I think we are actually concluding this now. Any final round of any thoughts, Dr. Saab? Final round to share. Hey, Kishore is. Anita, will you allow Kishore to speak, please? And Madan, please feel free to leave. Not a problem. Not an issue.
Thanks. Bye.
Hi, Kishore. Welcome. Good to see you.
Yeah. Hi, Chandrasekhar. How are you?
Thank you. Very well. Please.
I agree with what you started with, saying that the figures of the government and private are always different, and they'll always remain different. and you know why. I don't need to speak them out.
Yeah.
Number two, we talk of rainfall. Yes, they say 97%, 100%, 106%. That's all fair, but the rain should be timely, number one, and in intervals where the crop needs it.
Absolutely.
Nobody talks. It's like, it rains in my back garden, it's rained all over the world, sort of. That's not the real way of looking at it.
Correct.
Then another point I can tell you is, we're talking of supply demand. Yes, supply 100% is necessary. But with the supply, you need to see what are the other inputs to the supply for all those items reaching the store, which includes right from the input of fertilizers to whatever you want to call them, transportation, advertising, packing, whatever.
Correct.
Nobody talks of that inflation, the labor. How much of labor has gone up? Nobody talks about that in agriculture sector. There are so many other factors that we need to look into this. Before, we talk of inflation of the general commodities. Yes, fair enough. What about the actual inflation? When you or your wife or I go to the store, I know what inflation is. I know exactly, because I know what I'm getting in the mandis and what I'm paying over here. But why are we paying more? It's because of all the added costs in it. And added means I'm talking of inflationary costs. I'm not talking about the natural costs. Fair enough. So nobody talks of that, and I don't know why we don't talk of that at all. Like look at crude oil going up. That adds to it. It has a cascading effect everywhere.
Correct.
So I think we should take all these points that also when we talk of inflation.
Point taken. Dr. Saab, any final comments from your side?
No, I think we have discussed enough. The only point I want to make is, during COVID times when APMCs were closed, the value chain was much shorter. And the consumer's experience dealing with the thousands of small distributors, whether they were FPOs or SHGs, is much better. So it was coming to my mind when somebody asked that if the prices are increasing, what should be done? I said, suspend APMC regulation for 6 months for that crop.
Right.
See the difference.
Yes, very interesting. Yes, correct. I agree. I think we need to think out of the box, as they say. Very true. Rajini, any final comments from your side? No. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. I think with this, it's nearing 5:30. We'll conclude this session. I want to thank all my panelists, of course, Dr. Goyal, Rajni, Panikkar, and Madan, who just left. And of course, very, very important comments from Kishore Bhai. And I want to thank IMC staff, IMC's IT department, Anita Naik for putting all this together. It's been very, very interesting. If you have more questions, Anita, please write your email ID and the participants can write to you for any more response. With this, let us conclude this event. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the participants also. Good luck. God bless you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.